All right, well, we are going to get started. Those who are out still on the beach, you're going to miss something. This is really special. I'm telling you this. We're going to be talking about cultural relevance. It's an amazing panel here. So I will not speak much other than this. I'll ask the questions and let the experts answer those. So I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves. But first, I want to do that by asking them a question that relates to cultural relevance. So one of the biggest questions that we have for brands, companies, organizations is how do we remain culturally relevant? So as you, and how do you define cultural relevance? So as you introduce yourselves, can you please answer that question? And I think we'll start with you, Hugo.
This is working. Yeah. Time. Yeah, so Hugo Coreas. I'm VP of Brand Marketing and Fan Engagement at UFC. Been in the UFC a little over 10 years now, so I've seen a lot of the success and growth we've had there over the last 10 years. And my responsibilities really entail everything brand marketing, also looking across experiential marketing, and then most recently responsible for all our content, domestic and international as well, and ultimately driving campaigns, to drive engagement and revenue for us. And that's a hard question to start. I don't want to be put on the spot here, but yeah, cultural relevance for me, I think it really starts with one big element, which is understanding, and that's understanding your audience. And I look at it in a three-tier approach, which is I like to look at it from the people in your organization, right? What they stand for, what you do, the people that you're with, and how you're building your brand. We also look at it, an extension of our people is going to be our athletes. We have over 600, 700 athletes in our roster, a global roster, as you may know, so there's many intricacies in that lens that we look at, and then ultimately you have to look at what we like to say is, our fans decide. Our fans, again, we go all around the world, different makeup, every event we go to every week there's a different fan base, but we look at them collectively, and understanding that audience is going to be the key, I believe, as we start to build authentic, campaigns that resonate with this audience. But the most important part of that is making sure that you stick to your brand values as well. So that's my definition. Hope I didn't take too much from you guys.
I think there's going to be a lot of common themes throughout. In fact, I can probably trace common themes across the last two presentations. So, hey everybody, my name is Shortley. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Relevance. We're a sports tech company, so we're measuring and valuing all of the assets within the world of sport that are not the 30-second spots. So there's lots and lots happening within sports, especially like F1, cars themselves, and we're the guys that are out there actually measuring that valuation. And prior to that, I spent about a dozen years with Nielsen, so long time in the measurement world and leading outcomes types of businesses. So, yeah, like I said, I think there are a lot of common themes. If I were to define cultural relevance, it starts with understanding and then, incorporating values, beliefs, and attitudes around specific groups, whether it's racial groups, sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, again, the common theme that I'm hearing over and over and over again is it has to be authentic. There has to be connective tissue that's authentic and connected back to your brand before you really embark on that sort of endeavor.
That's awesome. Well, this one works. Yeah, so Alex Otanez, I'm the CEO of Shockoe. Before I go into what we do, I just want to answer the question. I think it's pretty simple. It's about being present in somebody's life. I read a book not too long ago that basically said, as people, we long to be seen. As brands, we long to be human. And so that answers the question pretty well. It's just, we want to be relevant in somebody's life. At Shockoe, we work with some of the world's largest brands, and our number one goal is to solve a simple pain point, which is this thing that we've all basically created, which is over-notified users, right? We notify them with push notifications, with emails, with text messages, with just gobloads of data, and that's not being relevant. It's basically just inundating a customer, a consumer. So at Shockoe, we essentially streamline the customer experience to create a single focus for our customers through mobile applications, through text messages, and really being there for that consumer when they need you.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Simon Yoxall. I'm a managing director at Iris. We're a creative innovation business. We have 14 offices globally. I'm responsible for the B2C, along with Liz, who spoke earlier, first on the DC. We look after the B2C business across Atlanta and New York. Our entire proposition is about creating participation between brands and consumers, and the kind of core way we do that is through helping brands authentically appear and contribute to culture. So hopefully I sound like I know what I'm talking about in the next 20 minutes or so. When we think about, I mean, I agree with everything everyone else said. You know, it's about understanding your audience, it's about being present, it's about being credible and authentic. I think the one thing I would add as well is trying to make sure that you're building platforms, like lasting interactions with culture, and not thinking about it as fleeting moments or one-offs or jumping on trends or things like that. I think considering culture as a place to build long-standing, not fleeting moment.
So thank you for that. You've all done just a really good job of defining cultural relevance and building the context. You've also done a really good job of kind of telling us who you are in the industry in which you work. So I'll start on that and with Simon and maybe come back this way. What changes have you seen in your industry as of late as it relates to cultural relevance?
Well, lots of people like us sat talking about it more than we ever have, for sure. I mean, you know, we're an agency that has culture at the core of our proposition. There are now agencies that are being born that, you know, are purely culture first, culture shaping agencies. So it's incredibly central to what a lot of agencies are talking about and doing. It's obviously inherent in most good marketing, you know, being culturally relevant to make sure the message resonates. So you're seeing the prominence of it, I think, a lot more in the agency landscape. We're also seeing much more culture-first briefs. So before we would get briefs that might be inherently culturally, you know, skewed because they're social first, or it was a partnership brief. We now get briefs that are very much about how brands can kind of activate and shape culture. And then the second thing I would say is the rise of peoples and platforms. You know, owned and earned has never been more important than it has. But no longer can brands just survive on paid alone. So, you know, the prominence and the access to be able to create partnerships with various platforms and people just gives you that immediate level of authenticity and credibility and that kind of organic and authentic mouthpiece.
You took something I was about to say, but I think one of the biggest changes is you're no longer pushing the message out to your audience, you're involving them in the conversation. And we see that through influencers. We see that through a lot of different means. I think for us, it's slightly different. I was talking to Mason over lunch. Mason's our head of product strategy. And I think one of the things that he brought up is COVID essentially made everybody digital. So a lot of our brands, the brands that we work with, through digital at everything, right? So let's do text messages, let's do this, let's do that. And the big change there is we basically went from a marketing first company to basically throwing digital, and now a lot of our clients are trying to figure out how do I consolidate that, right? I can't just keep notifying my users with an email, with an SMS, with all sorts of information. So the biggest change that we're seeing coming out of COVID right now is this consolidation and really looking at a customer experience from the eye of a customer, not from the eye of a brand.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of common themes, but I'll actually give you, I think, 3 things that have changed and 1 thing that hasn't changed. One thing that certainly hasn't changed is sport continues to be an incredibly powerful medium. I think I had seen Nielsen data not too long ago that 17 of the top 20 shows viewed this year are actually sporting events. So sports is incredibly powerful in terms of moving eyeballs, but also I think incredibly powerful from a cultural relevance standpoint, because across different diverse cultures, people still gravitate around sports and sports teams. So that's the one thing that really hasn't changed, and I think it makes sports all the more valuable, which is why we see all the investment in sports and, you know, sports and entertainment properties expanding into much bigger conglomerates. I think what certainly has changed. You know, I think again, gone are the days where you can sort of you know, just deliver a one-way message. And Alex, you brought that up as well. The days of marketing kind of imposing the will are gone. It's two-way communication right now. It's building connective tissue. I think another thing that's changed is also just the realization within companies that this is not just a nice to have to develop. This is actually a mandatory part of their business strategy to be culturally relevant. If we look at just population growth, the U.S. population is growing 2% a year. More than half of those consumers are coming from, you know, other ethnicities. If you are not addressing culture, you cannot grow your business. And I think the final thing is the tools have definitely changed. And again, some of my colleagues here have talked a little bit about it. Again, I'm a Nielsen guy from a long way back. Linear TV, everybody knows that linear TV is continuing to decline. And if we look at millennials and Gen Z, the tools are very different. You know, you have TikTok and Reels for short form video. You have longer form video that's now replacing linear TV as an option. And I had read a statistic that about 11% of Google's search business is now on TikTok, which shocked the hell out of me because, you know, Google had a monopoly on search for so long. So I think, you know, just the tools that are being used are incredibly different.
I mean, how much more is there to add to that? But I would say for our end, I am the sports property, right? And we are putting that to practice. I'll echo the sentiment on the influencer approach. I mean, that's something that we're doing every day. We've taken this direct approach about having influencers. It's something we believe in, and how we go out there and we connect. And to that point is building that relationship and having that two-way communication, I think is key. In addition to that, I think as overall for us in our sports industry, it's not always about being first. I would say it's more about always kind of taking a look at the landscape and understanding what is something that resonates with your brand before you jump in first. You don't always have to be. Even as an organization, you have to be strategic about that.
Thanks, Hugo. Now, you talked a little bit about what you're doing specifically at UFC. We've talked a bit of theory, and then you start to go down the execution. Can you maybe walk us through a practical execution with respect to cultural relevance from kind of like concept into the actual execution?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it goes back to what I said earlier about our 3 pillars that we look at, looking at our people within our organization, and we started seeing, you know, a growth over the last couple of years of, you know, our audience as well, which has been prominently in the Hispanic sector. You know, our fan base right now, there's 10 million, about 20% of our fan base comes from Hispanic background. We've seen that also show up in our athletes. You know, most recently, if you're a UFC fan, you probably saw we had 3 UFC champions that were for Mexican backgrounds. Now we have 1, because that's what happens. You lose sometimes. But that presented an opportunity for us and our audience. We started seeing that, you know, Dana was also very bullish. She's like, we have to do something because we have to have a showcase for this audience what we're doing in the market. We're also getting ready to open up a Performance Institute in Mexico City, which is another reason for us. So again, it touches on everything that we're working on. And so what we did this year is, for the first time, we looked at September 16th, which is a very cultural relevant date in the Mexican community, especially in Las Vegas, where it's a traditionally fight combat sports day, right? The biggest events have been held here in Vegas, the Canelo fights, very relevant to us. We got ahead of it and we said, we need to step in and be authentic. We got the date, and we went ahead and put on a full-blown event, tagged in Noche UFC, which felt authentic, bilingual, connected, went out to market. But it wasn't just about the event. For us, it was about all the touch points. So it came from not only if you tuned in that night and you watched the program, you got to see it in a very authentic way in Spanish, with Spanish commentators were able to commentate on the fights. You got to see the flag, all the fans that were in attendance. You got to see the treatment of the colors that were done in the broadcast, but then from there, we extended it to our consumer products. We extended it to our athletes, what they were wearing. So it, again, it was a very 360 approach. It wasn't just, let's go in soft and see how this comes back and how people react to it. It was like, no, we believe in it, so let's go in 100%.
So very good. Same question for you, Alex. Like, what are you doing, and what's your team doing to kind of shape and embrace today's culture?
I'll go with some of what Paul said. It's just like the inspirational aspect of sports, right? And I guess what's the same with the UFC, but I think sports for a lot of us, sports basically bring us back to being a kid, right? And so that's a perfect place to bring somebody into that conversation. And so some of the clients that we work with, some of the largest sporting brands that we work with, we're building mobile applications for them that essentially draw that user into the application, right? We do micro clips. So if you're at the event, for example, and you see somebody basically shoot a hole in one or have a birdie, you have a little micro clip and you remember that memory so you can share it with your family, you can share it with your daughter, you can share it with your wife. And so for us, it's about basically bringing that cultural relevance into the digital solution, right? It's not just about sending them a message, but bringing them into that brand itself. The same thing happens with UFC, right? When you look at the UFC match about, right? They're like, oh, remember when that happened? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that over dinner. And so when we build applications, when we build these solutions, it's not just about sending a message out. It's about bringing that person into that conversation. So it sparks a memory. So it creates that inspiration. As Paul was talking, I think I was thinking, you know what? When we're watching F1 tonight, we're all gonna want to drive just a little bit faster. So how do we do that, right? When we watch a PGA tour, we're all going to want to go out and play golf. Even some of us that don't play golf, we're going to want to go out and do that, right? When we watch, I don't know, LeBron James, we're all going to want to dress a little bit better. So again, I'm kidding. Maybe play basketball, I can't, but still. My point is, that's what we're doing, right? We're bringing that conversation into the mobile application so people feel like they're part of that brand. So now when they go shopping, now when they engage with the brand, they're not just being told or given the story, they're part of that story.
Well, awesome. So we've traveled down, we've defined cultural relevance, we've built some context in our industries for what that is. We've talked a little bit about practical executions within our organizations. Now it's time to understand whether or not these things work. So maybe we'll go to you, Paul. How do you measure something like cultural relevance?
Yeah, it's kind of a hard question, but there are a lot of different measurements and techniques that you can use. So, Alex, earlier talked about survey-based techniques. There are a lot of quantitative things that you measure outcomes. So I think survey-based, Mike?
Thank you.
Survey-based techniques are critical, but you can isolate different variables through things like market mix analysis and even attribution type of work to really isolate different variables and even creative execution. So there's some really sophisticated measurement techniques that are out there. I think again, kind of bringing the sports lens back into things. We as a company at Relo, we think that one of the things that we're really trying to do is pioneer more of bringing outcomes into sports sponsorship. It's not something that really exists today, and I think sports sponsorship has always been, well, the CEO likes the golf and Pro-Am, so we're going to invest in PGA Tour, and that's just not an investment that's tolerable anymore. So to be able to prove what you're doing and be able to to show again, like if part of the goal is to influence different cultures, there are ways of doing it. But I would probably start with survey-based approaches.
Yeah, I'd build on that. I mean, I'd love to say we have a magical cultural index number or something that allows us to kind of immediately track it. We don't. We do a lot of real-time things like social scraping, social listening. We do a lot of desk research and more traditional things you can imagine with building kind of creative strategies for brands. Once a year, we step back and do something called the Participation Brand Index, which is a mix of qual and quant. It's a survey of looking at 150 different brands, a lot of our clients, a lot of brands that sit in kind of the same sector or peripheral sectors. And we look at 5 different pillars, one of which is culture shaping, and kind of go deep on what are the things and the levers that are allowing certain brands to be more relevant and interesting in culture than others. And that's great because it allows us to apply active insights and principles that we've taken from that survey with some of our brand partners. It also identifies opportunities with, in areas where other brands are over-indexing in their category versus no brand.
Yeah, and just to kind of add, I don't think that measurement comes in at the end. Measurement actually comes in at the beginning too. Right? And having more data to really understand and build that understanding around culture, I think is absolutely critical for any sort of execution and activation. So, it starts with building that understanding through measurement, and then it ends with being able to measure those different outcomes incrementally over time.
And just to build on that, it goes back to the point we were talking about around lasting cultural platforms, because it's easy to measure the impact of some viral post or moment, but the true impact of doing things repetitively, consistently, credibly just allows you to build a much stronger base for measurement and understand kind of the journey you're on.
Sounds like two measurement nerds talking.
Yeah.
I'm going to add on to it. What you said now. Oh, sorry.
No, just add on to that lasting part. So, like I mentioned earlier, Noche UFC, we did it this past September. Well, right after that, Dana was like, "That's it. We're doing it every year now." So now we're tasked with doing an event at the Sphere, which is going to be insane. But that's the idea of an idea that started. It had a cultural relevance, and now has become one of our tentpole. Most likely something that we'll be doing going forward for the time being.
Yeah, I think just to kind of tie a bow around the measurement, we talked about sort of the foundational culture, right? The slow-moving culture, and I think there's sort of like two different research approaches. One is to really understand that deeply, and you can get that by building a culture committee or being part of different organizations and having a culture board of experts that help you establish that. But then there's the sort of the quick twitch, always changing aspect of culture that's really important to use tools like social listening and other scraping sorts of tools to kind of keep up with the things that are happening literally every month.
Awesome, very good. So we've reached the portion of this panel where we're going to go to the audience for Q&A for a little bit. I've got a couple of questions, but before we do that, as you get your questions ready, I'll ask Alex a question. We've talked a lot about cultural relevance, how it's more important to organizations, more important for our success. How does a brand or an organization prevent themselves from becoming a culture vulture, a pick-me, a try-hard, any other term that you want to use?
I think, what's this time? Maybe. So I think one of the things that I'm thinking about as we talk about cultural relevance is it's about building a relationship, right? And coming back to what I started with is a brand is trying to become more human, right? So if you look at a brand becoming more human, how do we as people build relationships? We see if people respond to us, right? Like if you don't want to be this culture vulture, you don't want to be that person that nobody wants to be around, right? And so it's easy to see I shouldn't say it's easy, it's really hard because we have people that are doing this as a living, but what you're looking for is response, right? Like if I say something to you, do you respond positively? If I engage with you, are you engaging with me? And so I think what do companies have to do to basically not become the culture vulture? I like that. Is build messaging that engages their users, and then look for that response. Just be on the lookout for that response. Think of yourself as human, and if I basically push something to you, am I getting something back, right? Like that's what I would continue. Like that's what we do with our clients all day, right? If we put out this app, if we put out this messaging system, is somebody responding to you, or are you just pushing it out into the void and hoping that that message stays relevant, right? Like that's what I would suggest anybody does.
I'm sure you've got a point of view on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, Alison from Puma earlier talked about ASAP Rocky and bringing him in as a kind of, literally a partner that's going to help them build and create and design new products and apparel. So that's one way of doing it. I think, making sure that you're bringing the people, brands alone can't, very few brands can truly shape culture. You have to borrow on people, places, platforms, spaces that are really actually what people care about and are really things that are influencing culture. So I think doing that is one thing, and bringing them in and creating with them is really, really important, not just creating for, and not just broadcasting messages or jumping on trends. And then I think, I'm not going to talk anymore about like platforms and kind of lasting moments, but I think brands need to know the cultures that are going to resonate most with our audience. They should have identified and defined them, and that should be a kind of parameter they put on anything that they're going to jump on.
Can I jump on that for a second? So one of the things that you just kind of triggered something, but when we talk to some of our brands, one of the things I commonly refer to is Amazon, right? Amazon has this amazing digital strategy, and it works for them because of their culture, because of their history, because of what they promise. If you are a company that sits in that CPG realm or that retail realm, and you're trying to build an app just like Amazon or a strategy just like Amazon, you don't have their distribution mechanism. So just because your app has different colors, just because your text messaging has different colors, it still looks and feels like the Amazon app. What we look for is people building digital solutions that represent their brand history, their brand heritage. And so don't be a copycat. Try to basically play off what made your brand special from the beginning and build a solution that basically represents that.
Wonderful. All right, friends, your turn. Questions from the audience if we have them.
Hi, I'm Matt from Stereo. I have a question for Hugo on UFC. From the outside, one of the best things about the brand is you've got these ambassadors and your fighters, but they all show up in culture differently, right? Like the Conor McGregors of the world, the Sean Stricklands, they all come with their own culture and they show up globally in different ways. How hard is it for the UFC to differentiate their culture versus these ambassadors, which people often assume kind of are synonymous with the brand?
That's a great question. And it is a bit challenging at times, right? When you have over 700 athletes. Some have more clout than others. I think Conor on his own is his own brand, and that's how we like to position it, right? At a point, he was UFC very close. The unique thing maybe many of you may not know or do know is all our athletes are independent contractors, right? So we can't, as much as I would want to, tell them about brand strategy or something that I feel is important. Conor's his own person. They're all their own person. So I think one thing that we stand on is we want to let our athletes, they're them, they're their own person. Like you mentioned, they bring their own culture. I think what we have the opportunity, though, is as a brand to build around everything else and then tell our story and bring those layers. And sometimes there's opportunities that line up great. I think, sometimes we have athletes like an Alexa Grasso, right? First female champion from Mexico that fought for us on that event. That works out really well. But at the end of the day, I think we try to make sure that they are their own person.
Other questions? I think we got one over here.
Stephanie from, Golden Knights. So I guess Simon or anyone, when you think about branding, right, from a creative and from a visual standpoint, it's really easy to represent, celebrate culture on the one-off events, right? Like go to UFC, like brilliant, so good, right? For us, thinking about some of the different, tentpole dates that we would want to celebrate, but from a brand perspective, how do you still maintain true to your brand, but also kind of shed that former visual look and feel and become a little bit more malleable so that it's not seen as just a one-off branding exercise or, I don't remember all the different names you called it, but so that it doesn't seem fake and it really does seem genuine and like your brand is trying to evolve from a visual standpoint.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think these things are going to take time to, your consumers and audience will get used to your presence in certain places and spaces, and that comes with consistency. It's difficult to apply it I hadn't really thought about it through the lens of a visual language. I think, I don't know, my take, which is not rooted in anything scientific, is I think brands often care too much about brand consistency, especially from a visual perspective, because it's more about what you're doing and how you're appearing and how you're contributing in that moment than how you might look. Obviously, you want to make sure there's artifacts to your brand that are central or present, so it's got a strong correlation to you. But I think it's more about how the brand behaves than anything particularly visual. And I think that, again, is about finding the parts of culture that are most relevant to your audience and consistently, incredibly activating within them, and building a cultural platform that allows you to do that and show up and be planned, not truly reactive, I think. Is that a good answer? Okay.
Other questions? Oh, right here in the front. No, you cannot ask me a question. You can ask me a question next.
Too bad I already have the microphone. This question is for Ken. I think no place is culture more evident than in sport, and you have people who are, whether they're good at the sport or not, or hoping to be a part of a community of sports supporters. I know you're a part of the collectible version or side of Fanatics, and that's its own culture. How have you been working to grow that so that when people think of a card collector or game used jersey collector, that it's not maybe who they thought it was?
That's a great question. I'm not going to answer it. But let me tell you why. Because after this session, I'll be back up here, and then you can ask your question.
Sounds good.
Other questions? All right, I'm gonna wrap up with one question for everyone. So the last question is, what advice would you give to leaders, to folks in this room, who are looking to kind of make sure they stay in touch with today's culture? Like, what would be one bullet point you'd give them to walk away with and consider?
I'll take a shot at it, right? I think we hit on it earlier. I think cultural relevance is not a trend, right? You don't just jump on trends that come on and off. I think you have to really have internal perspective, and I go back to what I said earlier, the people, your audience, really have something you believe in, and then that will dictate what you do and how you stay relevant. I don't think it's about trying to be first. Even in our organization, we really pride ourselves on being innovative and always trying to push it, having events all over the world, but we always take a moment to be strategic with that, and it's never about trying to hop on the trend.
One bullet point is hard, but I think I would say, again, do your homework, really understand the values, the attributes, the behaviors of these different cultural groups, and then they need to align to your brand. If there's a disconnect, if there's disharmony, if you're being a culture vulture, right, then you can actually harm your brand more than hurt it. So I think, again, it's that connective tissue. It's doing your homework, really understanding these different attributes of these different cultural groups and aligning them back to your brand and being authentic.
I'm going to go with something a little bit differently, just in the theme of today. Watch live sports, specifically the fans. Watch those people cheer, laugh, cry, smile, and try to bring that into your business, right? It gives you a chance to disconnect from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and look at this true family.
I'm going to say create with, not for. So bring in collaborators, partners, creators to help build brand platforms, not just replicate or imitate or comment on culture. I think it's about how you bring in true partners that are going to amplify your brand message, that are going to deliver on the objectives you want. I think that's really key. And that's something, I think we found great success doing, is just not being the kind of typical heads down, creative agency thinking about traditional channels, traditional outputs, advertising first. We'll always look up to culture and see who might be interesting, who might be resonating with the right audience, with the right brand, and try and connect and collaborate with them.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Very good advice from very seasoned leaders. I appreciate your time, and thank you all as well.